Greetings and a warm welcome from me, astrologer Patrick Arundell. Today, in the latest of my deep dive videos, I'm going to explore Saturn's station in direct, which occurs on the 4th of November at 0 degrees and 30 minutes at 7:03 AM Universal Central Time. But Saturn's been retracing its steps for 20 weeks from the 17th of June. So that's a huge percentage of the year. It's actually 38% of the year, and of course is an annual event, so it has quite the impact. And of course Saturn moved into the sign of Pisces on the 7th of March. So there's a lot to share with you. I'm going to just explore the themes of both Saturn being in Pisces, the energy of the host Pisces, what it will mean that Saturn's now going to station direct. It will emerge from shadow on the 7th of February next year. But when is it going to start to slow down again and go into its pre-shadow phase? When will the next retrograde occur in 2024? Also, what does the event chart tell us? Saturn is the ruler of Capricorn, so we need to look at what planet is in the sign of Capricorn, but also what planets are in the 10th house of the event chart, which of course is very redolent of the energies of Capricorn, because there are two very important influences to share with you. Also, what house is Saturn in when it stations direct? That's really fascinating. But also, the energies of Pisces are quite complex, and of course it is the sign of culmination, and Saturn's very much about structures, and Pisces really is limitless. It's not really about structures at all, so we have a little bit of a mismatch. So how can we work with this energy going forwards? What will it mean for each of the 12 zodiac signs? I'm going to explore that. And also, what is going to be the major impact of Saturn over the next 6 months or so? There's two, one on the Leo full moon, which occurs towards the end of January on the 25th, and also on the Gemini new moon of the 6th of June 2024. And both are potentially quite challenging, to be honest. So lots to share with you. If you are new to my channel, thank you so much for joining us. This is very much a community. If you have any thoughts, please share. I do try to interact with each comment. If you're a returning visitor, it's wonderful to have your company once more. I really appreciate all the support, and your likes, comments, shares and subscriptions mean a really great deal to me. So let's just have a little look at all the mathematics. So 4th of November, 0 degrees 30 minutes at 7:03 AM Universal Central Time. As usual, I base my event chart on Greenwich, not because it's in the UK where I reside, it's because we have the 0 degree of the latitude. So when the retrograde began, it was at 7 degrees and 12 minutes. So essentially, if you have any planets in mutable signs from 0 degrees through to around about 8 or 9, so the first decan of any mutable sign, so that would be Pisces itself, Gemini, Virgo or Sagittarius, I think the last 20 weeks has probably been really quite hard going, because those angles, the opposition, the conjunction and the square, are not necessarily going to be ones that we don't experience the power of Saturn in its more resisting way in quite a meaningful manner. Saturn, since it's moved, also came into conflict with the energies in Gemini, but more particularly in the sign of Virgo, where we had a big cluster of energy. Now, those energies have all made way. So we're moving into this next period, which takes us through to the 7th of February when the post-retrograde shadow ends. And that sees Saturn get back to the degree it was when the retrograde began, 7 degrees and 12 minutes. But Saturn will go into its next retrograde at 19 degrees and 25 minutes. So it's really taken quite a giant step forwards from the 0 to 7 degrees of 23 right up to nearly 20 degrees in year 2024. But the shadow period, because it retreats back to 12 degrees and 41 minutes, that actually begins on the 24th of March. So really through to the 7th of February, and then again from the 24th of March, we're going to experience more slowing down energy. Now I feel on YouTube particularly, Saturn and Jupiter can be represented in a very polarized way. Saturn's absolutely dark, evil and awful, and Jupiter is represented as being, absolutely totally reliable to provide some kind of uplift, joy and success, good fortune. But I just don't think it is as binary as that. And very often when people, just to reassure you about Saturn, when people have Saturn going over a major angle or house cusp, I mean obviously not all astrologers, it's quite unusual for astrologers not to use house cusp, but there is some people who don't. But usually if Saturn goes over a house cusp, you're going to see a big event, but particularly on the angle. So if Saturn's been making its way through the 12th solar or natal house, that can be particularly difficult, and of course through the 4th house as well. But if it moves into the 1st house, that can be a time when someone actually recreates their whole reality. Remember, Saturn's about structure, but it's also about hard work. So if we really accept the reality that Saturn's always going to be impacting on us in some way or another, because we might think, oh great, it's out of the opposition to my zodiac sign, but it may still be having an impact in your natal chart. And similarly, even in your progress chart or your directions, there could be influences that the move in Saturn is creating that you may not be aware of. So transits or sun sign astrology will only give you a certain amount of information, but certainly Saturn moving across the angles can actually provide a reward. So whether it's the 7th house, a serious relationship could come to the end, so maybe the reward is your liberation, you're escaping from something that hasn't worked, isn't making you happy, but it does, obviously the transition is very painful and not easy, but it can also be a time when people actually will become bonded, get married, move in together. Similarly, if Saturn goes across the 10th house cusp, we may go through a transition where a job we've been in for a long time comes to an end, perhaps because the sector we're in has changed, the trading environment has altered, or perhaps because we've lost our enjoyment for it. Perhaps the company has been sold. Sometimes we don't always have control, but equally it can be a time when a claim beckons, because Saturn rises to that point in our situation where all that hard work, discipline and application comes back to us in a very positive way. So let's just think about the themes of Saturn and Pisces. So, as I mentioned, they are an unlikely match. So Saturn very much about structures and really pushes us to establish our boundaries, so where we say no. But there is a kind of strange linkage between the two, because Saturn does take some of his symbolism from the fact that he is the last cosmic body that we can see with the naked eye. And if we think that Pisces is the last zodiac sign, the 12th, and therefore, as I mentioned, the culminating sign, he in some way matches some of the culmination that comes from Pisces, because basically it's the last link between us on the earth and what we can physically see out there. Now, I'm not sure if you knew this, but Kronos, the lord of time, is actually the Greek ruler of what we see as Saturn, which is obviously a Roman manifestation. So completely different from the free-floating archetypes of the sign of Pisces, which is limitless and gassy and can be absolutely amazing for expanding our consciousness and embracing the more spiritual dimension. And therefore Pisces can be seen as being the final frontier itself. But the mystery of the sign of Pisces is very different from the harsh reality that Saturn can sometimes turn can sometimes apply to our realities. So this can, of course, be the planet of tough love, but it can be about the lessons we need to learn. It may need to be where we need to be more disciplined. And the sign of Pisces can be where we can avoid responsibilities, where we're just drifting along without too much structure to our situations, which isn't good for us. But it can also be a time of purification or dissolution. So if escapism in its negative forms, which obviously there is, a lot of issues around the world with trying to escape reality. We all might like a nice glass of wine with our dinner, and that's a lovely come down from the stresses of the day. But if something becomes a compelling need to escape the harshness of our reality, you can see how the archetypes of Saturn and Pisces can in some ways actually make us much more conscious of how we need to be aware of people who might struggle with addiction, or we may need to become more aware if we struggle with embracing the reality of mental health, whether it's in its psychological, emotional or spiritual dimensions. If we judge it and say, because of the practical reality is, oh no, we don't want to look at those things because those are the things that happen to other people, we're going to perpetuate a lack of joined up, homogeneous being in modern society. So essentially we can see that Pisces can be about escape, but Saturn here can actually encourage us to be much more responsible about our own mental health, realizing we all have it. There may be days when we're feeling a bit out of sorts and not so good, or go through periods where we're actually suffering with depression. And if we are much more tolerant of one another and much more conscious of the power of our words on the overall well-being of all of us, really, the better it's going to be. So Saturn can teach us basically over the next couple of years to be much more responsible about mental health. Now, I was just reading this morning online near to where I live that some money is being provided for addiction support services, which is terrific, because I think in Britain there isn't a lot, or a lot's been stripped down in terms of mental health support services in recent years. So that's where we can use the hard work, the business-like approach of Saturn in a way which has a compassion too. Now I'm sharing on the screen now the event chart, and that shows you that Saturn's in the 4th house, which is really interesting because the 4th house is about family, emotion, feelings and property, which has a kind of echo towards the sign of Capricorn, but the property I think is more how we exist inside the property. Capricorn is much more about the physical structure, the mortgage we may have, and our desire to have somewhere that befits our needs in some kind of practical way. Now you can also see in the event chart that Venus is in the 10th house, and the 10th house is very much in keeping with the energies of Saturn because it's the ruler of the 10th zodiac sign, Capricorn. But that is opposite Neptune, which is one of those magical influences if we are able to benefit from the upside, but it also can be very distorting and very mystical, but also in some ways very disappointing. So we could encounter someone who lets us down. They may be someone we really want to like, but for some reason or another it just doesn't work out. So if you're meeting someone new at this time, I think it's a case of steady as you go. But Venus actually also forges a fantastic trine to Pluto. So in natal charts, when people have this, they can really love very, very deeply, and it can be actually something that really transforms things like possessiveness, which we know that Pluto can actually be very much linked to power, and Venus desire, but actually they're collaborating really well. So clearly the ongoing sextile between Pluto and Neptune does continue. So what about the big challenges that are ahead? There's two. 25th of January, a quincunx with the full moon in Leo. So a quincunx is 150 degrees. So let's just think about that event in terms of the overall zodiac. So the sun will be in house 11, the collective. The moon will be in the sign of Leo, our needs as an individual, but can be about romance, play, sociability, creativity. And miserable old Saturn is there, still in its shadow period, saying, what about me? So around our friendship situation, our social situation, but romance, important, very important to keep mindful of the psychological dimension. Then the Gemini new moon of the 6th of June is a square with Saturn. So obviously Gemini energy is very much about quick wits, nimble, it's mutable, it wants to move through things in a fleeting way. It's ruled by Mercury, and so again we're asked to make sure that we stay sincere with how we feel. So this is the lesson of Saturn through Pisces, which is going to be ongoing, whether it's in retrograde, whether it's stationed in direct. But I think what we can do is think back about what we have gained and learned over the last 20 weeks, because Saturn's about lessons. He is, if you like, the strict school teacher who makes us pay attention, and we may feel resentful about that at the moment when we're keen to sort of tap our pencils and sort of look at what's going on outside, but that person imparts knowledge which actually becomes helpful to us. So that's the way we need to think about Saturn. So Saturn going forwards gives us a chance to think, what did I learn since the 7th of March when he moved into Pisces, but particularly what have I learned in the retrograde since the 17th of June? And how can I use those lessons while he's still in that shadow period to the 7th of February to try to embrace the reality of Saturn. Saturn is the planet of reality, whether we like it or not. As I said, he is always having an impact upon us somewhere. That's important to understand. So what I'm going to do now is go through each of the 12 signs from Aries through to Pisces. You can relate to them in terms of your sun or your ascendant to give you a flavour of what you're going to expect until Saturn begins that next retrograde on the 29th of June next year, 19 degrees and 25 minutes. Now I've mentioned a few themes here: transit reports, progressions and directions. Just to let you know, a transit is the moving planet in the sky applying to the way that we look at our natal birth information. So the classic way is we look at how it impacts on the birth chart. But the birth chart also evolves. So through progressed astrology, we basically take the ephemeris and count forwards the number of years that someone has been on the planet. Say 30 years, we look forward 30 days and take a snapshot of the ephemeris, see where the planets are. It's incredible, but it works. It's so important, progressed astrology. So the transits in the sky can be interacting with that chart as well, which is our inner journey. Directions takes the same approach as the sun in progressions, just under 1 degree a day, and that takes all the planets in that person's chart forwards 30 degrees and helps us, it's also called solar arc, helps us to look at things, structural things, particularly around planets like Pluto, Saturn, Neptune and Uranus, which hugely influential, and see how they're interacting with the natal chart. So that gives you a bit of a flavour, but if you would like to know more about your personal astrology, if you give me 3 pieces of your personal birth data of time, date and place, or date and place, if you don't know your time, I can produce for you your birth chart, and this will give you searing insights into what makes you tick. You can get a much more intimate knowledge of the patterns that are played out in your life. You can also get your forecast for next year, 24. I'll give you the rest of this year, 3, and 30% off. Please see the link beneath this video. So Aries, for you, Pisces hosting Saturn is definitely very much about trying to come to terms with some of the things that have been going on in your life over the last 27 to 29 and a half years. So it's a big one. If you think back to around about 14 and a half years ago, or even 7 and a half years ago, you may have got a little bit of a flavour of what this is applying in your life. But essentially the 12th house is very psychological. If you're someone who's really into personal development, You like to try and understand yourself and the motives of others. You're trying to accept responsibility for your life journey. You can work with Saturn really, really well. If you're someone who is a little more cautious about looking inwards and a bit fearful really of the more psychological dimension, then this is a huge opportunity for you to try to grow your awareness. But as ever, it does require work with Saturn. So the work could be from watching videos about psychology. It could be around becoming much more conscious of the healing potential in your situation, because the 12th house can be about healing. And it could be about you'll need to just clear up some strands that have gone on a long time, because I feel you are darting into a new future. And that's coming from the solar eclipse series that we've now gone into. We've had one in your sign and one in the sign of Libra, and also, of course, crucially, the North Node. So you've got an opportunity through to the end of January 25, in this particular phase of this evolution for you, to really dart into your future. But to really make the most of that, you have to work with this past stuff that's been augmented with Neptune since 212 and since March the 7th with Pisces. So the retrograde may have been hard going if you felt isolated, not had access to many interactions, you felt that people have been cold or limiting, or perhaps very hypercritical, or picking on your vulnerabilities. That may have felt deeply unpleasant, to be honest. So the best way to work with Saturn is to realize that, yes, it's not easy, but if we really apply ourselves, roll our proverbial sleeves up and accept that Saturn is going to be there for some while to come, and this is your opportunity to make it work for you. So all that preparatory work you do means that once Saturn moves into your sign, you'll really be ready to move forwards in a really, really exciting way. So Taurus, for you, I feel that once Saturn moved into Pisces in early March, you might have started to reconfigure some of your plans for your future, the long-term future. As Saturn went through your 10th house, the sign of Aquarius, it's possible that you did actually, towards the end of that transition, find that you were gaining traction, that people were becoming much more mindful of what you had to offer. And maybe there may have been a breakthrough professionally, or perhaps even in terms of a property matter. It's just that once you made the transition across the 11th house cusp, in terms of solar astrology, you may have started to think, well, some of those goals were great, but they weren't enough for me. Or actually, I've changed inside who I am, and I don't want the same things anymore. I want something that's more inspiring, because the 10th house is very practical. It's a little bit cold. It is actually about hard and fast, practical success. It's the material world. It's to do with property. It is to do with the size of our ambitions, if you like. Whereas the 11th house is much more about how we connect to others. It can be about teams, networking, our higher values, and that's why coming straight after its transition through the sign of Aquarius, moving into the 11th house, which ironically has that flavour of Aquarius, which of course is still co-ruled by Saturn. So you started to think at that point about maybe just adapting some of your long-term plans. Or have you found, particularly since the retrograde, that some people in your friendship group, your network, have actually started to just melt away a little bit? Or you've started to feel more picky and selective about who you wanted to spend time with, because that wouldn't be a surprise? Or have you just felt a little bit unsure about what you want from your longer term future, particularly if you've got Uranus cresting very close to planets in your natal chart? So obviously where Uranus is now, it's getting much more into its journey through your sign. So it just depends. It may not just be the sun, where it's stimulating that need for change, freshness, excitement, but also authenticity, and where you need to feel that you can be totally yourself rather than just play by the rules. And also Pluto's continued to be very provocative in your 9th house around knowledge, giving you huge, awesome opportunities to demonstrate how you can grow and expand. But ironically, that went into your 10th house for those 11 weeks from the 23rd of March, but then from the 11th of June back into the sign of Capricorn, so the 9th house. So there's still a lot of stimulation there around being a bit more experimental in your approach. But I feel that you probably have learned who you can really rely on and who you can't since Saturn went retrograde, and there may have been some disappointments, and also something that you felt very optimistic about earlier this year in the material world may have lost its luster. So what can you achieve between now and when Saturn goes retrograde on June the 29th next year? Well, again, it depends on the degrees that are being impacted by the movement of Saturn into your natal chart, your progress chart, and so on. But I think generally speaking, you've had a bit of a taste of how things can slow down, cool off, and that could have been very disappointing. What you can do now is double down and really strengthen your resolve to make sure that you use the purification that can come with the watery sign of Pisces to rinse out of your situation the people who are not good for you. Sometimes when we decide to walk away from a situation, we're doing it not as a judgment on the other people, we're doing it as a judgment on what we need to do for ourselves. So, you know, if something has come to a close, some big cause, or you've gone a bit lukewarm about a team you used to support, for example, don't be surprised, but now you have an opportunity to do the work with Saturn's help on where your future direction really does lie. So lots of opportunities right through to the 29th of June, but it will require application and an understanding that you've gone through huge shifts with Uranus through your sign the last 4.5 years, and also with Pluto since 2008 in your 9th solar house. So Gemini, the retrograde for you may have seen more responsibilities coming your way, perhaps more responsibilities for family affairs. If you're a leader in your family, you're an older member of your family, maybe you've been spending more time with grandchildren, maybe there's been some support that you've been able to give in terms of helping people to get on the housing ladder in some way, loans, or taking some asset in a property out and put it into a new one to help people move forwards. Saturn very much about the physical world, remember, and Pisces potentially about compassion. That's a nice combination, isn't it? But also tracking backwards, you could have had more responsibility at work. Now, if you're someone who's extremely goal orientated, that may have been absolutely up your street. If you're someone who finds all of that stuff a bit of a grind, that may have become a bit oppressive. So I feel that what the opportunity is with the station direct is to recognize that if you're not in a role that really makes you happy, you are going to have to do something about it. And if you drift and just try to go with the flow, because obviously the mutability and watering of Pisces very much about going with the flow. So you'd be putting things off through to the new moon in your sign of the 6th of June, and then it could all come up to the boil in a way that you're still going to have to deal with it, because Saturn's not going to give you any support on that new moon this coming year. So I feel that the proposition for you at the moment is that maybe there is going to be some reorganization or reordering that will be necessary for you to accept. But it also is a chance to perhaps raise your profile and show people that you can take on the extra responsibility. You can be a leader, you can be a line manager, you can start your own business. But it may mean that you really got to commit yourself, and that could be something that in some kind of unconscious way that you try to avoid, because it can compromise your flexibility, which is something that I think most Geminis really like, the maximum amount of freedom to just respond to situations in the way you want. So I feel some new bigger gigs could come your way through to the 29th of June, but also with extra responsibility can come extra scrutiny. And obviously the sign of Capricorn, which Saturn rules, is very much about being in the public eye. It is the daylight point of our lives. It's where we have maximum amount of attention upon us. So just be conscious of that. You have an opportunity, but it will require self-discipline and hard work to make it work for you. But it may also require you to stop, and I'm not saying you individually are vacillating, but if there has been a little bit of putting things off, it's about seizing the moment and really grappling with it as soon as you can. So Cancer, having Saturn in your sister water sign of Pisces is obviously a positive potential, because the 9th house is about where we grow and expand. But there's obviously a paradox there, because Saturn can be limiting and restrictive, slow things down. So if some hopes to expand have not played out quite as you wanted since the 17th of June, it would hardly be a surprise. You could feel it's back to the drawing board, but that may require more knowledge, which House 9 is about. House 9, in an overall context, is ruled by Jupiter, which is also one of the two rulers of the sign of Pisces. It just has a different influence. It's much more about expansion of our spiritual awareness. So I would say that you may have felt a bit frustrated. Travel plans may have been really thwarted in some ways over the last 20 weeks. And also you may have felt that your own personal space and desire to be a freer spirit has in some ways been inhibited. If you've been involved in any kind of traffic situation or contractual situation that's dragged on, not necessarily a dispute, but it's just not been resolved as quickly as you would like, again, no big surprise. But Saturn going forwards in the 9th house still primes up the same dimension. It's an opportunity, but it's an opportunity that's only going to come with an innate amount of commitment and application. But this is where you can score in spades, because you're very tenacious, and because of the host being watery, you can get the balance between feeling things but also applying yourself. And so I would say through to next June the 29th, you could learn some new skills, you could move somewhere, you could do some long-term or longer distance journeying. You could find out a lot about a different culture. You may push yourself about being more spontaneous. And again, Saturn isn't something we think was linked to spontaneity, quite the reverse. But if your life has been very, very formatted and very regular, kind of very Saturnian, perhaps Saturn's pushing you to use your hard work to find the ways to be a little bit more off the cuff. And of course, your home point is always security, and the 9th house can be about risk, because it's about expanding outside our immediate boundaries. So it means pushing out. So it's all about pushing out for you, but working at it, Cancer, through to the 29th of June next year. So Leo, Saturn since March the 7th has been making its delightful way through your 8th house. 8th house can be about shared finances, can be about property, investments, shares, pensions, legacies, business. And if things have felt quite hard going, and obviously we are involved in a big retraction globally, and it's only gone and got more challenging recently. It wouldn't be a surprise if the income that you've been getting and the expenditure that you've been expanding have not matched up as well as you would like. That's been a pretty common thing for many of us, but it may have seemed more acutely the case for you since the 17th of June. And particularly in terms of your connections to others, you may have felt that in some ways someone was keeping a distance, wasn't quite being as availing to your majesty as you would like. So it is all about sort of hunkering down. The 8th house can be where we make transitions. Unfortunately, Saturn and the 8th house could point towards something in your life coming to a close. Now, obviously, those transitions are not easy to go through, but usually it's because we do need to make a transition, but of course sometimes it can be about our physical reality, so something about what's going on around us that we don't have any direct control over. Saturn, yes, it can, in the 8th house, it can mean that maybe is that someone around you is not doing so well. It also can mean that in an intimate relationship, being up close and personal with someone could prove to be more challenging, or you're going to get much more connected and devoted. Again, it can be a bit polarized. Great news, however, is that you are quite the operator when you really put your mind to it. And remember, the sign of Pisces is about flowing, and I feel that you've been doing a lot of conforming, particularly since 2008, which has really been tough for you, Leo. So you haven't really had quite the opportunity to demonstrate the full range of your skills and talent, because there's been so many obligations to other people. And Jupiter is going to be moving into your 11th house on the 23rd of May in 24, but even before then it's still retaining its location in your 10th house of success. So still continue to push forwards, but no, you may have to just commit yourself. Sometimes when you see an opportunity, you can be a bit tentative from actually going for it, which is surprising for a fire sign. And sometimes you need a bit of support or a nudge or a friend or a partner saying, look, you can do this. So you can do something, but maybe if you're trying to do something fresh around your work, there could be one income stream from the past that may need to make way, but it is going to open up something that's bigger and better and matching of you at your very charismatic, shimmering best. So Virgo, for you, Saturn continues in the 7th house. You could be experiencing them, particularly since the middle of June, some resistance around relationships. And of course, because Venus was in your 12th house for 4 months, which is really a huge amount of time, and then of course you had Mars and the Sun and Mercury all bursting through your 12th house, and then all coming into your sign, clashing with Saturn, and then going face to face with Neptune. I don't think relationships have been particularly easy for you, but you've probably found out who is right in your corner, and so that gives you a degree of clarity. But equally, it could be that all that 12th house energy was you doing a lot of inner work, releasing yourself from situations and people that don't work for you, and that's now making you available to connect, whether it's in business, in friendships, in hobbies, or in lust, with a person who's worthy of who you are, your true worth. So from now through to June the 29th next year, it wouldn't be a huge surprise, depending on the degrees in your chart, that someone new can come into your world who's really significant. But it's going to be a relationship you're going to have to really take seriously. And if you're ready for that type of commitment, could be perfect timing. And of course, the converse can be equally so. So over the next couple of years, if you are involved in a relationship which isn't honky-dory, you're going to have to keep working at it, and in the most extreme situations, it could mean that a tie would come to a close. I'm sorry to be honest about it, but Saturn can be cold, it can be cruel, and the 7th house is about where people reveal their opposition to us, open enemies, as well as where we set our boundaries, but it also is where we relate. But Saturn and the ruler of the 7th house, Venus, are very different characters. So I wouldn't expect any relationship to develop for you without a lot of learning going on and a lot of potentially challenging situations, but you will end up at the end of the process much clearer about what's and who's truly right for you. So Libra, Saturn has been in your 6th house since the 7th of March and in a more intense, impactful way since the middle of June. Let's just explore what the 6th house means. Ironically, it has an opposite meaning to the host, Pisces, in your particular case. So Pisces can be very much about that emotional, psychological domain, but the sixth house is very much about the details. It's about our practical health, our physical vitality, our stamina, but it's also about our obligations. It can be about our jobs, the actual processes within the role. So the role could be called blah blah, that's the 10th house, and our ambition within that, the 10th house. But the 6th house is where we need to actually do the things in a meaningful way, which produces an outcome that has some kind of productive value. So that's the 6th house. So all those areas since the middle of June, energy, physical vitality, work responsibilities, feeling that you're having to do a lot to support other people potentially, may have been a bit onerous, and just in a down-to-earth way you may have felt at times really quite exhausted. And of course Uranus has been such a provocative influence for all of us in the sign of Taurus, because its return to Taurus after 84 years has not proved to be a great success for global politics. But of course it's had an impact on the financial systems as well. Why? Because Taurus likes steady Eddie, Uranus is disruptive, and for you it's in house 8, which is where you're most invested. So if you're really invested in your job, work very hard, make sacrifices, are thoughtful, self-disciplined, look after the details, but you don't feel that you get any acknowledgement, there's not a lot coming back to you, that can lead to a sense of feeling drained. And of course also it's about the other components in our life, our family relationships, the extended family. It can be about our friendships, and of course it can be about our romantic situation as well. So life may have felt a tad cooler, a tad harsher. It may have felt that some strands within your situation that in the past you may have just thought, okay, well that's part of the equation. Those strands may have taken on a greater power for you personally. So I feel that what we can do with the 6th house energy and Saturn from it going direct now is to try to widen the lens. And you have a great gift for weighing things up, standing back, seeing the big picture. So say for example you're in a job which you don't feel fulfilled in, but maybe it has some benefits to you. What you can do with the 6th house energy is to use your strategic view of things and also an understanding of what you enjoy delivering on. And if they are not meshing at all, then maybe you've got a decision to make. And through to the 29th of June next year, if you don't make that decision, it could be kicking the can down the road on something that does really need grappling with. But the other thing, and I can really relate to this, if you are a born-again couch potato and enjoy watching your back-to-back series on all those famous streaming platforms, and find it a little bit difficult to find the spark to do some exercise or get into grips with your personal everyday organisation's a bit of an issue. Libran people can be very laid back in their own time, and in fact all the way, pardon me, I'm not meaning to be rude at all, but even a little bit lazy, particularly if you have got a job which requires a lot of commitment and investment of your energy. So, and of course if you have felt a bit weary, it's understandable that you've wanted to chill out. Totally understandable. However, what Saturn says is you've got to work at it. So work at still doing appropriate exercise to make sure that you stay sharp, and look at your diet and nutrition. 6th house, very much to do with those things. Little details, little nudges can actually make a difference. If you know, for example, that you may not be intolerant to it, but it doesn't do much for your digestion, try to get a bit more rye into your diet. If you know that dairy is not really that great for you, then obviously try to eat perhaps more goat's products. Little trims and nudges like that can make a difference, because at the end of the day, as I said in my prelude, Saturn does require us to work at it. So Scorpio, Saturn moved into your 5th house on the 7th of March, and any astrologer will tell you that Saturn in the 5th house is not necessarily a walk in the park. The 5th house is about joy. Saturn's cool, detached, scrutinising, like that strict school teacher. And because of that, when it comes to your talents, creativity and flair, if you really want to showcase them over the next couple of years, you're going to have to be really tenacious. Now, it could be that that suits you fine, because you can be someone who really does put your all into situations which inspire you. And of course, the great thing for you is that Saturn at least is sharing the water triplicity of your sign, host by the host Pisces. So that's good for you in that regard. So if you want to demonstrate your talents, lovely. But when it comes to the world of love, obviously the cool breeze that is Saturn can be glacial when things aren't going right. So the retrograde since the 17th of June may have demonstrated where there were parts of your romantic situation that you weren't very happy with, or someone wasn't very happy with you. That could be that you're not in a relationship. Could be you don't want to be in a relationship. I'm just telling you that Saturn in the 5th house can influence marriage particularly. So, and also children. So if your relationships have felt a bit more tense with your kids or a partner, that's possibly why. But also remember, Saturn can be about opportunities if we apply ourselves. So maybe you've been grappling with an idea that you've got, or a strand that you're excited with, but it's not quite falling into place. So that's the window of opportunity through to the end of June next year. Despite the 2 shadow periods, the one we're still going to be in through to the 7th of February and the one which will begin on the 24th of March, there is an opportunity, but it's all about that tenacity which Saturn can give us once we've really decided on our objectives. So it is really making the most of your skills and talents, taking them seriously yourself. Saturn's encouraging you to take you seriously. It's not just all the incoming energy, it's how it manifests within you outwards. So an opportunity to really work hard at things that excite you, that are different, that can help you to showcase what makes you very individual. But in a romantic situation, you do need to take it seriously if there are tensions, to not just try to flick them away, because with Uranus and Jupiter in your 7th house, 2 different energies. Uranus is perhaps making you more conscious of your need to be a little bit more in your own space, but it also can flag up the truth of the situation, but it can also be rather disruptive and unpredictable. Jupiter obviously can bring opportunities. So you can see it all depends on your unique circumstances how this is going to play out, but you will have to take these areas seriously if you want to get the maximum from them. So Sagittarius, the 4th house, is about home, emotion. It can be about family matters. It could be that this is an area that you've been working hard on in terms of structure. So if you're modifying where you live, redecorating, moving all together, you've had a new addition to the family, or kids have left home, or you've got more responsibility for someone who's older, a family member who may need more support. All of these themes may have been playing out. But there's an existential impact in your 4th house for you, and that is around your reluctance to look at emotional issues. Not because you're judgmental about mental health, but because your nature is so innately wanting to get on the front foot, dust yourself down and just accept that life's not a perfect process, and when it goes a bit awry, you just got to move on to the next adventure that really stimulates you, which is absolutely and completely admirable. And it's one of the things that's so brilliant about Sagittarians. But what Neptune since 212, but particularly Saturn since March, have been saying, look, the more you can stop, pause, digest and work through anything that comes up that you find is tender within yourself, or isn't quite in kilter as you would like, or there are things about your home environment that are not working for you, or perhaps if you work from home it's become quite oppressive in terms of having the space to relax and just chill out. All of these things will have been playing out in a more intense way with the retrograde. Now they're not going to stop playing out, but it just is going to ease a little bit, and it will get better from February the 7th, because also that part of next year there's a glorious set of influences in the sign of Aquarius, which are really going to be stimulating you in a very upbeat and lovely buzzy way. But essentially, if you can accept your vulnerabilities, your need for security, opening up and sharing about some tender issues, it will be very therapeutic for you. And also it can help you to become more homogeneous in terms of the drive that you need to find, the spark of energy to achieve the exciting things that are out there that you want to go for, but you'll be at peace within inside yourself. So that's really what Saturn is urging Sagittarius folks, you Archers, to look at over the next couple of years. So Capricorn, depending on your natal birth chart, it could be argued that a goat is more attuned to dealing with retrogrades than other zodiac signs, because you're innately someone who deals with challenges and obstacles with that huge amount of patience and perseverance, application, perspiration, and also understanding that we never get to any part of our life without a degree of putting something in. If we put something in, we get something back. You really get this because you're an earth sign. But of course, in the third house, that's about our everyday communication, our connection with our neighbours, can be connection with our siblings, can be our ideas in terms of not so much our founding beliefs or our values, which is more second house. Third house is more about how we articulate and connect to other people. It can be through text messages, email, conversation. But of course the third house can be quite free and easy. The sign of Pisces is mutable, so it deals with the easy, but an nth free with Saturn sitting there. So it may be that someone somewhere has actually said to you, I don't agree with you about that particular subject. Or if you've had an idea that you're wanting to get out there, it may be that in terms of working very hard at it, you haven't quite had or gained the traction that you feel that your idea really deserves. But as I said, the retrograde has probably meant that you've just doubled down, realised, okay, this is life. Life's not a perfect line. It does require that classic Capricorn perseverance and brilliant sense of humour. But you could find that some of your ideas about certain situations will change, and with it going into direct, stationing direct now, I feel that you're going to perhaps want to learn some new skills. You may be even more determined to share ideas of your own. You may be thinking about a new mode of transport, but you need to make sure that the earthiness that's very much part of you is applied to your ideas, and just understand that Saturn somewhere along the way could slow things down. So whatever you're trying to achieve, it might not happen at the speed of light, but once you get there, which could be in 2 years' time, the chances are it will be very, very solid and lasting because of the way you've gone about it. You've done your research, you thought about it carefully, you know where you're going to evolve. Your shrewdness will come back to you. But certainly in the last 20 weeks, I feel there may have been a lot of resistance around you. You may have experienced people that you found to be really frustrating, and that may have been hard to bear. It's going to ease up now, but as you know, you still got to keep on going. So Aquarius, since the 7th of March, Saturn has been in house 2. Everyday money, self-worth, your core values. Second house can be to do with the foundations in our world, and maybe Saturn has been showing itself in quite a tough way, because Saturn in the second house can impact on income, and it can impact on how that then makes us feel about our value. So since the slowdown began, and then the retrograde itself on the 17th of June, the chances are you've had to really beaver away and apply yourself to the max in order to maintain the revenue coming in. But equally, the money might have been coming in, but you haven't been getting much joy out of it. The value of what you've been doing, say the job, may not actually give you a particular sense of pride or satisfaction. Or it may be the money comes in, you're okay with the pride and satisfaction, but the problem is you feel that your life is still inherently unstable because the second house demands firm foundations, but Pisces is moving, it's leaching because of the water. So it's highly likely that some of these things have been playing out, and since the retrograde, maybe more intensely, because that's all had to coexist with the erratic energy of Uranus in the fourth house, which home, emotion, family, need for space, need for distance, maybe unpredictable. You come into contact with unpredictable landlord, building society, financial services obviously has been under pressure, costs have gone up, and all of that may have not been great. And that's where that duality in your nature may have really served you well, because yes, you're seen as being very Uranian, forward-thinking, zany, bit changeable, quirky, all the things us Aquarians get labelled at, but there is that inner core of determination and ability to graft away at things that aren't easy, and that may have been what you've been falling back upon. So hopefully the financial situation and that sense of the foundations and the self-worth can ease a bit, particularly from the 7th of February, because there's a huge amount of Aquarius energy developing with the Sun, Pluto moving on the 21st, and then we've got some great stuff going on with Venus and Mars in February. So I feel that a lot of the pain that may have been felt can provide a dividend, it can provide a reward, it can provide much more acknowledgement to what you're doing. But for the time being, it's steady as she goes, patient, try to trim back on the costs that aren't essential, and become much more aware of your value, how you value what you do. But if you're buying services, make sure that you check them out carefully, scrutinize them, very Saturnian, not just make quick decisions, very Uranian, and plan things and do the research and then really extract the maximum value. And that's really what I feel Saturn is asking us to do over these next couple of years. So Pisces, if you've watched my videos before on Saturn, you'll know, if you're born, yeah, you got it, the first 9 days of the sign of Pisces, you will undoubtedly have felt the power of Saturn since the 7th of March. And if you are born right at the beginning of Pisces, the fact that he's rewound back to 0 degrees and 30 minutes, it's almost like when Saturn went into Pisces, big fanfare, it's almost like a repeat of that. It's like Fanfare 2, the movie. And of course, if you are born early on, what does Saturn ask you to do? In the first house is the body, but it's also our individual expression. So there could be limitations. You might not have quite as much energy. So the energy you've got's got to be applied to what's really important. You may have plans and objectives that are very individual to you, but they're not so much about the collective around you. So what other people may want as part of the project may, for the moment, need to be parked a little bit as you really hone in first house on what's critically important to you. Now, if you're born more into Pisces, it may have felt more like a 12th house energy, more your emotional and psychological health has felt low and not as good as you would like. So I feel that Saturn starting to go forwards again, think about all the things you read and heard about Saturn entering your sign for the first time in 27 years. Of course, the whole process takes 29 and a half. We've got to think about the point it emerged from your sign 27 years before. It's going back in now for the second transition, and yeah, it requires hard work. It requires you to define what is truly important to you as an individual, because that's what the first house is about. So it's about getting rid of all the fripperies around you which aren't really essential, and it's about your need to survival, but also not just to survive but to thrive. But with that comes application, and obviously Saturn can be to do with limitation. So if there are things that are not really part of the core plan, those are the things that may need to fall away, so you can really take seriously this new beginning, which essentially is what it is, which you're going to reap the benefits of in another 27 years time, broadly, when we get to the end of the next cycle. It's been a real pleasure being with you. I've really been looking forward to sharing the Saturn Stations Direct video, because I think my chart is very Saturnian in some ways. I have a lot of Aquarius, but I also have Mercury in Saturn. But in Vedic astrology, sidereal astrology, I am a Capricorn, and also my Venus Mars midpoint is in Capricorn. Almost my Eros is in Capricorn, so quite Capricornian. Which means that I like to be productive and hard-working. Maybe people think I'm a bit serious, but actually my sense of humour is simmering away, and I will share more of that with time. Thank you so much. Take care. Please like, comment, share or subscribe.